Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the walkthrough. And today we're going to be walking through the Epistle to the Hebrews. We're going to do a background about the book, and we're going to do chapter one. Now, I know last time I left off on Isaiah chapter 66, and I still have yet to do a part two to that. As I was studying, even though I could have did a part two, I decided to go ahead and put that on pause to go ahead to try to hit two birds with one stone. So we are going to be going through Isaiah, and we're also going to be going through Hebrew. So you'll see the videos kind of flow back and forth from there. The Epistle to the Hebrews. If you guys ever wanted to know exactly what the Epistle to the Hebrews is about, by the time that we're done with this series, you're going to understand why it is referred to as the fifth gospel. You heard me right. The Epistle to the Hebrews is literally referred to as the fifth gospel: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Hebrews. So I know that you guys basically have read it before, but you probably never knew about the background of the book. I'm going to take you back into the first century of the New Testament and to see exactly why the book of Hebrews was actually written to the Hebrews. What was he trying to get at? So the first thing is, when we actually look at the first century world of the Jews, what you'll automatically notice is that in Jerusalem and, of course, abroad, but mainly in Jerusalem itself, there was a lot of factions. There was a lot of, different flavors of Judaism going on at the time. Of course, you had the Zealots, you had the Essenes, who we're really going to be talking about. You had the Sadducees, the Pharisees. Obviously, you just have the traditional Jews. And so all of these factions were around. I mean, there's a lot more that I could name. But when you look at first century Jerusalem, these are the kind of pools and the sects that are going on during that time. So when the writer of the Hebrews was actually writing, to the people in Judea, the people who had recently become Christians, right? These are people who have been Jews their whole lives, and all of a sudden they recently become Christians. The world that they lived in was basically a variety of Judaism everywhere. And so when he was writing, that is the kind of world that he was basically trying to get a lot of, basically separate from, to make sure that the Hebrews who became Christians would keep the clarity of the Christianity, of what the teachings of Jesus were and the teachings of the apostles were. So you're probably wondering, if all these flavors of Judaism were around, then what were some of the main things that the writer of the Hebrews is really talking against? Well, to actually answer that question, I want to go ahead and take a look at one sect that was around back then. And even then, they were also split up as well. I did studies with the church fathers, and they actually showed that there were different variations of the Essenes. So I'm going to go ahead and try to take my best look at the Essenes and see if the writers of the Hebrews was actually trying to, show that the teachings of Christ exceeded not just the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Zealots, but also the teachings of the Essenes, which were floating around at the time. So the sources of the times that we're going to be using are 13 small fragments from Qumran Cave 11, from the Qumran Library of the Dead Sea Scrolls. We're going to be looking at 11Q, right? Melchizedek text, right? That talks about Melchizedek. And also we'll be reading from some of these, right? Just some. Now there's a whole bunch, right? So let's go back, way back to the first century, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were actually found. So basically, there are tons of caves, right? Plenty of caves that, the people were actually finding all of these types of scrolls. Now, among these scrolls were obviously the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Dead Sea Scrolls are traditionally divided up into three groups. Now you have the biblical manuscripts, and those are the copies of the text in the Bible. And they comprise about 40% of the identified scrolls. Now the apocryphal and pseudepigraphal manuscripts, they're known as documents from, the Second Temple period, basically first century Judaism, like Enoch and Jubilees and Tobit, right? You'll find those in, the Eastern Orthodox Study Bible. You'll find it in the Catholic Bible. You'll find it in the early canons of the Bible. You actually find that the church fathers and including the disciples are actually quoting from some of these texts. Sirach, and you have non-canonical Psalms that were not, ultimately canonized in the Hebrew Bible, right? But of course, when it came to the Christian Bible and the Septuagint and things, that's where you found these things. Now, they comprise of roughly about 30% of the scrolls, but what we're going to be looking at today are the sectarian manuscripts. When I say sectarian, I'm not talking about secularism. I'm talking about sect, like a certain specific sect. These are called the sectarian manuscripts, previously unknown documents that speak to the rules and beliefs of a particular group or groups within greater Judaism, like the community rule, the war scrolls, and Pesher. And there's plenty of other scrolls with other names like Jubilees and all kinds of other scrolls. Now the thing is, who wrote these scrolls and what did they say? So let me, out of all of my studies, give you 4 key points of all these caves and all these things that they found. 4 key points, right? That'll paint the world a lot more clearly of, the Hebrews, right? The epistle to the Hebrews and the people of Judea. Point number 1. The texts of the great religious and historical significance is they include in the oldest known surviving copies of biblical and extra-biblical documents, and basically they preserve the evidence of great diversity in the late Second Temple Judaism. So these documents are written in Hebrew, they're written in Aramaic, they're written in Greek, so they're all types of variety, right? And mostly they're written on parchment, but with some that are actually written on papyrus, which is a little bit cheaper than parchment. Now these manuscripts generally date to around 150 BC and 70 CE. So in other words, a lot of this stuff comes 150 years before Christ. I repeat, what you're about to see are the interpretations of the Essenes that come from 150 BC. Now, 2, the scrolls are traditionally identified with the ancient Jewish sect called the Essenes. Now, though some recent interpretations have challenged the association and argued that the scrolls are penned by priests, Zadokites, and other unknown Jewish groups. So now we're getting a wider context of the world of Judaism back in the 1st century in Judea. And out of this world, there were a sect of Jews that became followers of Jesus. They could have been Zadokites. They could have been, priests. They could have been all kinds of, varieties of Judaism. Give me a second here. I think that my, hopefully this is still showing. Okay, I believe it is. Anyway, let me continue. Now, number 3 is we also found in Cave 11, which we'll be going over, there is an eschatological fragment figure, Melchizedek. And so Cave 11 also produced a copy of Jubilees. Why is that important? Isaiah 61 has to do with the year of Jubilee, doesn't it? So notice that, this kind of eschatological, the eschaton, that means like the end of days or the end of the age. This fragment that the Essenes had, Melchizedek was a key figure. Why is this important? Because when you look at the end of days or the end of the age, which is, what the people back then, they were looking for some type of new age, right? The ending of an old age and the beginning of a new age. And the Essenes thought that Melchizedek was going to be the one to usher this in. So that's what they always meant when they said, there's going to be the end of the age and there's going to be a coming new age. And this has a lot to do with the coming kingdom of God. This is the way that they thought. And we're going to see that when it comes to the book of Hebrews, that's why if you check this right now in the New Testament, there's only one book that compares Jesus to Melchizedek. And you guess it, it's the book of Hebrews. Now you know why the writer of Hebrews was writing, comparing Jesus to Melchizedek so much. It wasn't just a doctrinal thing. It was because there were certain Jewish sects around that were looking for a Melchizedekian Messiah. Now, of course, number 4, it is thought that the Qumran community would have viewed the book of Enoch and the book of Jubilees as divinely inspired scripture. Now, if that is the case, then this bolsters their view of Melchizedek. So, you also notice that when it comes to like the New Testament, yes, the book of Romans and the epistle to Galatians, they talk about him being Savior, they talk about him being Lord, they talk about him being, hey, even King, right? King of Israel. They even talk about saying, Jesus God, right? But in the book of Hebrews, Jesus is called high priest after the order of Melchizedek and greater than Melchizedek. Now you know why he was putting such an emphasis about Jesus and all of the emphasis on things that the other New Testament epistles really don't do. Now you know why. Look at the flavor of Judaism back in the first century. So let me go ahead and look at some of these scripts, right? This is what it says. This is what the Essenes wrote from 150 BC all the way to 70 AD. This is what they wrote. They say, quote, as far as for what he said, in this year Jubilee, you shall return each one to his respective property. Concerning it, he said, this is the manner of the release. Every creditor shall release what he lent to his neighbor. He shall not coerce his neighbor or his brother, for it has been proclaimed a release for Elohim. Its interpretation for the last days refers to the captives whose teachers who have been hidden and kept secret, and from the inheritance of Melchizedek. And they are the inheritance of Melchizedek, who will make them return, and liberty will be proclaimed to them, to free them from the debt of all their iniquities. And this will happen in the first week of the Jubilee, which follows the 9 Jubilees. And the Day of Atonement is the end of the 10th Jubilee, in which atonement shall be made for all the sons of light and for the men of the lot of Melchizedek over them, according to all their works. For it is a time for the year of grace of Melchizedek and of his armies, the nation of the holy ones of Elohim, of the rule of judgment, as it is written about him in the songs of David, who said, Elohim will stand in the assembly of Yah. In the midst of the Elohim he judges. And about him he said, above it, to the heights return. Yah will judge the peoples. As for what he said, how long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Selah. Now its interpretation concerns, Belial and the spirits of his lot, who, turning aside from the commandments of Yahuwah, commit evil. But Melchizedek will carry out the vengeance of Yah's judgments. And on that day he will free them from the land, or from the hand of Belial, and from the hand of all the spirits of his lot. Isn't that interesting? Melchizedek seems to be some kind of Messiah figure. So the way that the Essenes are thinking about this coming Messiah, they think that it's going to be Melchizedek, or they have some idea that Melchizedek has something to do with this Messiah and what he's going to do. Look at this one. To his aid shall come all the Elohim of justice, and he is the one who all the sons of Elohim, and this is the day of peace, about which he said through Isaiah the prophet, who said, how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of the messenger who announces peace, the messenger of good who announces salvation, saying to Zion, your Elohim reigns. Now, its interpretation, some people believe that the mountains are the prophets for all. Now, to continue to read fragment 11Q13, it says, and the messenger is the anointed of the Spirit, as Daniel said about him, until an anointed, a prince, it is 7 weeks. And the messenger of good who announces salvation is the one about whom it is written, that to comfort the afflicted, its interpretation, to instruct them in all the ages of the world in truth, has turned away from Belial and will return in the judgment of God, as it is written about him in Isaiah 52:7, saying to Zion, your Elohim reigns. Zion is the congregation of all the sons of justice, those who establish the covenant, those who avoid walking on the path of the people. And your God is Melchizedek, who will free them from the land or from the hand of Belial. And as for what he said in Levi chapter 25, verse 9, you shall blow the shofar in all the land of, and after that, it cuts. But notice that Melchizedek is being referred to as God. Now, the author also quotes from Psalm 82:1. Now, like I said, there were plenty of other fragments that I could have gone through, but I just want to go ahead and give you a taste of proof. I could have been exhaustive, but I don't want to be here all night. The author also quotes Psalm 82:1, where it says, quote, Elohim stands in the council of El, but inserts Melchizedek in the place of Elohim God. So you can already see that in 150 BC, they had this idea that their Messiah was not only going to come and save Israel, but this Messiah would be so great that he would be God himself in the incarnation of the Messiah. And they thought it was Melchizedek, or at least he had something to do with it. So this idea of Jesus being a God-man and the Jews never believed such a thing, I beg to differ. And that was just one source I could have used. I could have used how they ended up saying similar things about Moses, Abraham, and, basically the pseudepigrapha, right? And also, there were other things I could have used. But now, there are some additional notes that I do have here. There is a guy, he was a archaeologist, and he went down there in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he started digging around. And with his research, his name was Yigal Yadin. With his research, he basically says that he identifies the addresses of the epistle with the Jews originally belonging to the Qumran sect, who were converted to Christianity but carried with them into Christianity some of their former beliefs and practices with which the writer of the epistle takes issue. This is the background of the book of Hebrews. And I have to admit, F.F. Bruce and also Yigal Yadin, who is an archaeologist in Israel who dug up a lot of this stuff, they're definitely spot on historically. Matter of fact, it says El Harim was written to members of the Dead Sea area Essene community who had embraced Yeshua as Israel's Mashiach. and that the Dead Sea Scrolls present evidence of their doctrines. That comes from the scrolls and the epistle to the Hebrews, right? And that was from, a source that I'm not going to read. It just says, Scripta Harioso Yemitana, volume 4, and you could just see where that came from. So they're tying some of the doctrines that the epistle to the Hebrews is actually tagging against, right? He's actually hitting against. And yes, it sounds like he's hitting against a lot of the things that the Essenes believed. Now you see why the writer of the book of Hebrews ended up writing in the way that he did. He did not want the Jews who became Christians to get discouraged and to drop Jesus and go back into Judaism, or back into what the Essenes believed, or what the Zealots believed, or what the Pharisees believed, or the Sadducees believed. He didn't want them to go back. And so he tried to hit against a lot of the doctrines that were around that day. Now, the more specific the doctrines and clear the doctrines, then the more you can see what kind of sect of Judaism that he's speaking against. So this is the reason why the book of Hebrews is so important. And not only that, but it puts in perspective of how a Hebrew or an Israelite or a Jew is to follow Jesus and how he is not to follow Jesus. That's the reason why it's important to read the book of Hebrews. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up by reading chapter 1. And after that, I'm going to be done. And hopefully we can get to chapter 2 next time, and 3 and 4, and a whole bunch of other things. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and read chapter 1 of Hebrews. Now, this is what it says. It says here, in many ways and in various ways of old, God having spoken to the prophets, or basically, to the fathers in the prophets. In these last days, he spoke to us in the Son. So he's comparing how in the Old Testament, God spoke to the fathers through the prophets. But then he says, today, he speaks to us who live today through Jesus, not through the prophets, not through the fathers. And also, he actually labels these days as these last days. Kind of like how the Essenes had believed that they're in the last days and Melchizedek is going to come. Now you see why he's writing like this. He's saying, look, Jesus speaks to us, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he indeed made the ages, with being the shining splendor of his glory, the express image of his essence, and bearing up all things by the word of his power, having made purification for our sins through himself, he sat down on the right of the majesty on high. Now, usually when you do that, that means that, hey, you're sitting on the throne of David. And so here he actually quotes Psalm 110, verse 1, and he applies it all to Jesus. He gives it all to Jesus. Having become so much better than the angels, as much as he has inherited a name more excellent beyond them. So now he's lifting up Jesus high above any kind of other angels and things like that perhaps, the Jewish sects actually believed in. For to which of the angels did he ever say, you are my son, today I've begotten you? And again, I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. He's quoting Psalm 2:7. And again, when he brought the firstborn into the world, he said, and let all the angels of God worship him. So he's saying, did God ever end up saying to an angel, hey, I'm your father and you're my son? He matter of fact, he told the angels to worship Jesus. Wow. So he's greater than the angels. It says, And as to the angels, he said, quote, who makes his angels spirits and his servants a flame of fire. He quotes from Psalm 103, verse 4, if you're reading the Septuagint, or if you're reading the Hebrew Masoretic, it's Psalm 104, verse 4. But as to the Son, he says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated lawlessness. Because of this, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness far above your fellows. And you, Lord, at the beginning laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the works of your hands. They will vanish away, but you will continue, and all things will become old like a garment. And you shall fold them up like a covering, and they shall be changed. But you are the same, and your years shall not fail. Or in other words, they'll have no end. Now listen, I encourage you to read Psalm 45, verse 6 and 7, and read Psalm 101, but mainly Psalm 45, right? And you will see that when you go into those Psalms, in Psalm 45, you will see that the writer is talking about God. But in the epistle to the Hebrews, the writer is applying all those songs talk about God, and he's saying it's talking about Jesus. He's literally calling Jesus God through comparing the Psalms to him. He's saying, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. So he's saying here that Jesus is God. That's deep. Finally, it says here, and you shall fold them up, and I'll continue on, like a covering, and they shall be changed. But you are the same, and your years shall not fail. They'll have no end. But to which of the angels did he ever say, sit at my right hand until I place your hostile ones as a footstool of your feet? That's a good question. He never said that to an angel, right? But you know what? This writer is saying that he said it to Jesus. He's quoting Psalm 109, verse 1, or Psalm 110, verse 1, if you're reading from the Masoretic. Last verse says, are they not all ministering spirits for service, being sent out because of the ones being about to inherit salvation? Right? So he's saying that, whoever this figure is, it can't be an angel. It can't be them because they're being sent out as ministering spirits, right? It can't be anybody else but Jesus. This person who's being called God in Psalm 45, the writer says it's Jesus. So you can already see in chapter 1 that this is what the writer does to Jesus. So now that I'm done with chapter 1, I'm going to pretty much kind of, bring this to a close. But now that you guys pretty much get the background of the book of Hebrews, you'll understand why he's elevating him so much. Because there is a possibility that with all the flavor and diversity of those Jewish sects, it could be a possibility that some of the Jews believe that, that Jesus is no different than the angels, or maybe he's like an angel. And meanwhile, the writer of Hebrews is saying, no, he is above the angels. No angel was called my son, my God. And also, he's saying that Jesus is God by putting psalms that were about God and applying them to Jesus and saying them Jesus. So guys, I really hope that this has caused you to really think today. And we're going to go through like chapter 2 and a bunch of other things. But again, I thank you guys for definitely tuning in. I'm definitely going to pick it up next time. You guys take care. If you got any questions, email me at ssoreal@gmail.com. You guys take care. Peace and blessings.